Well, great reading today, and it kind of reminded me a little story of my own life. But I remember I was just coming back to the church. I was in my 30s, and my grandma was dying. And I did the whole thing, I seeked, I knocked on the door, I petitioned God, I did the votive candles in the back, I did it all, And I was there the night my grandma died. She died anyway, even after I did all this stuff, all this praying. And I remember I was a little salty with God. I was like, hey, I'm just coming back to the church. I'm seeking, I'm knocking, doing it all. What's going on? A couple days later, I ran into my grandma's doctor. And he was a good Catholic man. He was, because he always talked about God. And he said to me, he goes, Mike, thank God that God took your grandma on that day you were there. Thank God he did. Because you know what, Mike? Her brain was dead. Her heart was gone. Her kidneys had already shut down. We already lost her kidneys. And Mike, if we took her off that machine and she ended up living, she would be like rotting in a hospital bed for months and months on end until she finally would pass on her own. So he said, thank God that your grandma died on that night, right? And I remember I was like, wow. And he didn't even know what I was going through in my heart, And I felt so bad because I was blaming God for something that I didn't have all the information on. And I remember that day after I saw the doctor, I went to the hospital chapel and I kneeled in front of the cross and I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for doubting you. I'm sorry that I prayed, I seeked, I knocked, I did it all. And actually, you gave me the best blessing that I could ever have is for my grandma's life to be taken at that moment, And when we pray, sometimes we don't have all the answers, do we? We don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? We're knocking, we're seeking, we're trying to do all this, but we don't have all the answers. And there's three things that God can say. He can say yes, he can say no, or he can say yes later, right? Yes, no, maybe later. But it's important for us, and you see like in all our gospel readings, Jesus comes to people who are sick, who are suffering, and he says, what do you want? What do you want, right? He heals people with leprosy. He says to them, what do you want? They said, I want to be healed, right? He goes to blind people. What does he say? He goes, what do you want? I want to be able to see again, right? And so we have to not be bashful. We have to tell God, what do we want? And a lot of times as humans, we don't know what we want, right? And a lot of times God knows what we want or should need more than we do. But he wants us to hear it in our brains. So he will always ask us, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want from me? Right? And it's good that we trust, because this gospel reading has a lot of trust in it. And you ever notice that when we have relationships with other humans, sometimes we play our cards pretty close to the vest, don't we? We're not really vulnerable with all people. We don't really let our true self shine. We don't really open up our hearts. Why? Because we're scared they're going to use it against us at some point in time, aren't we? We're a little scared about it, right? And so God says, no, that's not our relationship that we have with each other. No. We're vulnerable, right? You're vulnerable with Jesus Christ. You open your heart to him. You tell him exactly how it is. You tell him exactly what you're going through. You put all your cards on the table. But then once you ask him what you want, you tell him what you want, you got to let God be God, right? You got to let God be God and know that you're not God. You have to trust in his final decisions. One of my favorite saints, St. Padre Pio, he always gave this spiritual advice to people who were in constant prayer. He said, pray, ask, don't worry. Pray, ask, don't worry. Let God be God, right? So let's ask ourselves today, we're going to have a little adoration before we start stations, maybe just for about 4 or 5 minutes. Let's ask ourselves, let's meditate on that a little bit. Number one, what do we want? What are we seeking? What are we knocking on the door for? And number two, do we trust? Do we trust in God's final decisions? Let us stand and offer our prayers and petitions.